Hello and welcome to This Is What Came Out of Me, a podcast about anything and everything, but mostly pop culture from movies, TV, podcasts and YouTube. In each episode I talk about things that have grabbed my interest and things that I think that you out there in the big wide world might be interested in. I'm SierraKiloBravo. Let's get into it. Today we're all about podcasts. First we'll talk about a new subscription that I have, and then about a couple of my favourites that hit milestone episodes this week. Let's start off with that new podcast in my sublist. It's called The John Batchelor Show. Someone on Mastodon recently mentioned it as a good source of news and coverage of current events. As I'm always keen to find good podcasts, I looked it up and I can confirm that it is really, really good. Batchelor hosts a radio show that's syndicated across a number of stations, and he releases the show as a podcast. But what makes this really great is that instead of dumping his whole show, he releases the various segments individually. While it does mean that you get a bunch of stuff in your subscription list, it means you can filter through and only download the ones that are actually of interest to you. So you only listen to the parts that you choose to listen to, and you're not left sitting through a 3-hour show and a bunch of stuff that might not be all that interesting to you. I find this to be a really great method, and it's much more efficient as far as listening goes. And for the record, I really love it when shows do this, and I also love it when they put timestamps in their show notes so you know what is where. But I digress. Another aspect of the show that I really like is his book reviews. He goes for a deep dive on the books he reviews and really pulls the guts apart by way of interviews with the authors. A case in point is one in his episode list that caught my eye just after I subscribed. It's called Target Tokyo, Jimmy Doolittle and the Raid That Avenged Pearl Harbor. As a bit of a World War II nerd, this immediately caught my eye. The Doolittle raid in particular is of great interest to me. If you're unfamiliar with what this is, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a ballsy payback attack on Japan was devised. Ballsy because with no bases in the Pacific, in order to launch an attack, it had to be from an aircraft carrier. There was risk of losing more boats post Pearl Harbor, a risk of losing the valuable planes and pilots, and of course the seemingly impossible task of launching bombers from the short and bouncing lolling deck in the middle of the ocean. The cojones on these guys were enormous, and the interview between John Batchelor and the author James M. Scott goes over the details of the planning, the attack, and what happened after the raid. I enjoyed the interview and the discussion so much that I tracked down a copy of the book. It turns out my library has a copy, and I have requested that, and that is now in my hot little hand. I can't wait to get into it. If all that sounds like it might be up your alley, then check out John Batchelor's series also on Hell's Island. It too is absolutely riveting. It's a great podcast that switches between current news items and historical items and book reviews with ease, and I highly recommend you check it out. So while that is a new addition to my list, two of my longest subs are the Joe Rogan Experience and also Stuff and Things. Both of them hit milestones this week, with the lads from Stuff and Things hitting 200 episodes and Joe Rogan hitting 1,000. Stuff and Things is, in their own words, about everything and nothing at all. And they usually spend their episodes talking about what they've been up to in the last week or so, what they've been eating, and things like TV shows and movies. It's two longtime friends enthusiastically catching up with each other once a week, and it's pretty cool to listen to. They didn't really do anything special for the 200th, and I was kind of hoping that they would play some best of clips of the many hilarious moments that they've had, but instead a huge portion of the show was taken up with them doing something they've done in the last few most recent episodes, something that I'm not all that keen on. Recently, they've taken to reading old diaries or school yearbooks, and while there's some funny moments, It's clearly way more interesting and relevant to them, and I've found it hard to get into. The bulk of the 200th was the same. They played some audio cassettes that they recorded in the early 2000s when they were in middle school. And again, while there were some cringy and funny moments, it was something that was much more of interest to them, and therefore more funny for them, having known each other for so long. But hey, it's their podcast, they can do whatever the hell they want. They did, however, finish with a segment that is usually good fun. They both have a love-hate relationship with horror and scary things. They love giving themselves a good fright. So they regularly read and explain the details of horror games such as Bloody Mary and The Elevator Game. In this episode, they went over the details of Corner Man in a return to form. It's a cool podcast, especially if you like the two dudes having a catch-up and telling funny stories type genre. Congratulations to Chewy and Ian on 200 episodes. As for Joe Rogan, 1,000 episodes is incredible. I can't remember what the episode count was when I started listening, but this has been one of my mainstay subscriptions for a long time. Joe is a great natural conversationalist, and even though most of his episodes run towards the 3-hour mark, the time always flies. I had hoped that they would take the opportunity of their 1000th to play some greatest hits clips or have popular former guests call in, but instead he followed his usual format of having guests in the studio. They were, though, two of his most popular guests, Joey Diaz and Tom Segura, and in some way it was actually fitting to have these two on rather than have a best of session. These three are old friends who have travelled and worked together for years, and their chemistry is unmistakable. They riff off each other like a live jazz band, and story after story after story would flow with not a dry eye in the house. There's nothing quite like a Joey Diaz rant. You might even learn some new swear words. If you've never listened to Joe, I highly recommend his show. Don't be put off by the lengths, they are very easy to listen to. I don't listen to all of his releases, especially ones about hunting or with comedians I don't know, or people who are clearly there as part of a promotional push. But there are many that are well worth the deep dive. For a variety of guest types that are great to listen to, I recommend episodes where he has John Ronson, Milo Yiannopoulos and Michael Shermer on. They've all been guests at least twice, I think, and have made for challenging and intriguing listening. Another couple of good ones are the one with Sam Harris and Hannibal Buress debating race and religion, and his election night livecast had some hilariously funny moments. If you want to laugh your ass off, then check out episode 911, where he has Eddie Bravo and Alex Jones on. Yes, Alex Jones. They get drunk and high and go down the rabbit hole, and I constantly quote this as one of the greatest podcast episodes of all time. There's so much comedy gold in there, it has to be required listening. But if you want to get a good idea of what most episodes are like, episode 977 with Jeff Evans and Bud Brutzman is a recommended one. These guys are filmmakers and adventurers. Their stories range from being a medic in Afghanistan to rescuing people off Mount Everest. It's absolutely riveting stuff and a great place to start with the Joe Rogan experience. So congratulations to Joe and young Jamie for 1,000 episodes. Absolutely fantastic. Well, that's all we have time for. Until next time, I'm SierraKiloBravo, and this is what came out of me.